what do you feel like are kind of the underlying causes that have, created so much crime and gangs in certain areas? Whether it's just the city of Compton or kind of wider LA. What do you think? What do you think is actually the root cause behind, these gangs coming about and being so powerful?
Well, drugs, I think. Drugs and the power of selling them and getting the money. I mean, these guys were making a lot of money back then. And again, I think the lure of these guys making big money because, before it was like, yeah, we're out here gang banging and we're protecting our neighborhoods and we're fighting with other gangs. But now, man, these guys were making a lot of money. And so with that came, they took Bloods and Crips across America, because when we would come in to work in the 90s and 80s, in the early 80s, late 80s, I should say, every day we'd come in, we'd get call from Oklahoma or Arkansas or Texas. Hey, man, what are these Bloods and Crips all about?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we had to tell them what's going on, what to expect that's coming to your neighborhood now. So
It's something I've covered in previous videos on my channel about, Blood or Crip affiliated gangster rappers in all different states. And, I often try and explain to people, you've got famous Crip rappers coming out of places like Memphis or New York, and I'm often explaining in videos, okay, this stuff started in Los Angeles and it kind of branched off to these other areas. That sounds like that was quite a big thing. It must have been quite interesting if other states' police departments are reaching out and saying, what is this thing all about? But it sounds like it was very rooted in the drug trade, and it's really that commerce of drugs around the country that kind of exported the gangbanging kind of with it to different states. Right?
It did. It brought it across America.
Something that a lot of people bring up, I don't know whether you'd agree or disagree with this, but a lot of people have said, it's all about the drugs that fund the gangs. Would, legalizing certain drugs or changing the drug laws, would that take power away from gangs? Do you feel like there would ever be a solution as far as changing the way the government deals with drugs to kind of take power away from these gangs, or is it too far gone at this point?
Well, I think it's too far gone now, but even if they did, it's like the lifestyle is the lure too, you know what I mean? Being out there and being a glorified gangster, hey, I'm a bad dude and stuff. I mean, it was there before the Bloods and Crips, and it's still here. So I don't think it's going to change anything by taking away drugs I mean, they're trying to legalize marijuana, but they'll just find something else, So.
It seems like the money is in the illegal stuff. It's kind of, if it's hard to get, that's where the gangs actually play their role, and they get the stuff that's not supposed to be in the neighborhood into the neighborhood and make the money off of it.
Yeah.
Something I found during my research that I thought was quite interesting. It sounds like before crack really popped off and became so synonymous, PCP was a very big thing in the community. Is that right?
Yes. When I came on, PCP was huge, and to this day, when I look back at it, I mean, we call it the devil drug because when these guys were on PCP, their eyes were all red and they were sweating and they were stiff and they were strong as hell. I mean, it took 5 or 6 cops to bring these guys down. I mean, we got good at doing it, at first though. It was like, what the heck, man? These guys were throwing 3 of us off of them, but we kind of got where we knew how to deal with them. But PCP is a crazy drug, so these guys a lot of times, man, they would smoke PCP, drink some 40-ounce beer, and then you put a AK-47 in their hand.
That's no good.
It's wild, you know what I mean? So it was scary. PCP to me was the scariest drug ever. I know now they have fentanyl. I've never dealt with it, but fentanyl is, I mean, it takes this much to kill you, so it's got to be the scariest drug now ever. So
seems terrifying.
Yeah.
It seems like the crack epidemic really changed things in the community. When crack cocaine came about, it seemed like it made, very hard drugs more accessible to people. Right. People that maybe wouldn't have done that drug before got hooked on it. Right. And the gangsters obviously created a huge enterprise out of supplying the drug. What were the changes that you noticed in the community? Because I've heard you speak in interviews before about how when crack first came on the scene, you guys didn't quite know what it was. And over the next couple of years, it really took hold of the community. So can you tell me a bit about your experience of crack kind of hitting the scene?
Yeah, it's like I say, when I first started in '83, it was basically the drugs out there were heroin, PCP, and marijuana. That was it. That's how the gangs were making their money.
Mm.
And so, they all had their places we'd go try to, jack them up when they're carrying guns in their little gang neighborhoods or whatever. And then all of a sudden, these guys were throwing this stuff down on the ground. And at first, what the heck is it? These little white rock things or whatever. We didn't even pay it. No, I mean, they got away with it for a little while because we didn't know what it was.
That was crazy.
Yeah, it was. And then all of a sudden we go, hey, man, we start looking at it, and it became more popular. Like I said, people are coming from all over to get it. You know what I mean? And I'm not exaggerating, but you can go down at one time in almost every neighborhood. There was probably 20, 30 cars lined up buying this raw cocaine. So, I mean, it really hit the street hard and fast, and it was very addicting. And so, man, these guys kept coming back, and that's why the longevity of it lasted so long, And these guys, the gang started making big money over it, and then they branched across to America. So it was a crazy time, man. Raw cocaine really did change a lot of things.
So we were just talking a bit about how the crack epidemic kind of affected the Compton community. Did you feel like there was maybe a certain point where the crack situation kind of peaked and maybe plateaued a little bit, or did it just get worse and worse? Was there kind of like a real golden age of crack in the scene, or where did it lead, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
Well, I would say probably in the mid 90s it started. So it started in probably the mid 80s, 85 or so, where it really was hit hard. And in about the mid 90s, I would say that's when it kind of died off. So.
And what do you think caused that? Was that good policing? You kind of shut it down, or did the excitement of crack bursting on the scene for the first time wear off?
Well, I think it's a little of both, because people found out how addicting it was, and people were losing not only their lives but their families, and just like any other drug when you get hooked on it. But at that time, law enforcement too came along with a lot of enhancements, and they formed a lot of task force. So law enforcement were working with the DEA and the FBI, and they were taking down all these big drug dealers that were dealing drugs all across America and locally too. So I think that had a lot to do with stopping the raw cocaine epidemic.
So obviously you were policing Compton. There's other areas that are kind of probably similar levels of infamy as far as the streets. I'm thinking of areas like Watts, broadly a lot of places in South Central. How did Compton kind of compare to other places? Was there a sense of a certain area being kind of the worst of the worst that the city had to offer, or was it kind of different years, things got worse in different areas? How did Compton compare to other places in the city known for their gangs?
Well, I think Compton, like I say, it was only 10 square mile. So right next to Compton, you had Watts. And Watts, to me, because they had 3 gigantic Section 8 housing projects. And these places were huge, and these places were tough. They were bad. I mean, police officers didn't go in there unless they had 4 cars. They wouldn't even go into these places. And these projects, as we call them, they were huge. They were like square miles, you know what I mean? And Compton didn't have that. We had our little Section 8 housing, but we had nothing compared to the projects in Watts. So to me, Watts was the worst place in LA, even though there was so much violence in Compton. They were compatible. But involving the Crips and Bloods, everything that happened with the transformation of Crips and Bloods, the way it evolved and all that, it started right there in Watts and Compton. They were like the hub of the Crips and Bloods.
So something I'm interested to know a little bit about is kind of the Piru gang that operated in the area. And somebody that I was interested to know more about was one of the sort of alleged founders, Sylvester Scott. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of the Piru's role in the area as far as the gangs go? And I think something that confuses a lot of people is there's always a lot of debate over the difference between Piru's and Bloods and sort of the heritage between each gang. Could you break down a little bit of that history for me?
Absolutely. I actually met pudding, they call him Sylvester Scott, through my boss, Reggie Wright Sr. He introduced us, and he told us how the Piru started. Because like I said, in the 70s, the Crips were taking over other neighborhoods, and people had to start up their own neighborhoods to defend them off, but they were all blue. They were wearing, called themselves Crips. Well, these guys, they lived in Compton, and they lived on Piru Street in Compton. And he goes, all we want to do is be different. We knew we had to start up a gang to defend ourselves because they're coming over trying to take our neighborhoods. Our school colors was Centennial High School. The colors were red, so they just adopted the color red, and they called them West Side Pirus from Piru Street. That's where they lived on. It was a street in Compton. Now, the Pirus, they formed, and then they started moving east. I should say east across Compton, the north side of Compton, and up in Watts in L.A. So all these Piru gangs started forming in Compton. So when you went north and you went into L.A., like they called themselves Bloods. If you were from L.A., they called Bloods. If you were Compton, they called you Piru. But they all wore red, and they all associated themselves Bloods. But it's just a simple thing that if you were from Compton, they started on Piru Street, you were Pirus. So all the LA gang, they called themselves Bloods. So if, for instance, there was a project called the Bounty Hunters Bloods. So it's just that simple. If you're from LA, you're Bloods. If you're from Compton, you're Piru.
And by contrast, obviously the Crips, there's been a lot of different stories over the years about, who founded the Crips and kind of where all of that came from. Right. Obviously, a lot of talk about Raymond Washington, Tookie Williams, both other people being involved. Again, what was your understanding as far as, I know we touched on it earlier, kind of more loosely, the idea of Crips and Cripples, where that came from. But as far as like individuals that were involved in the early days of Crip gangs, who were you aware of that was kind of early involved, and did you ever come across any of those kind of famous names?
Well, yeah, I was told how they were started because I had to teach the history of Crips and Bloods, and what I was told by people that were actually there, that it formed around Washington High School and in South Central LA. And again, Raymond Washington and Tookie, they were supposed to be the founders. Now, I wasn't there, I don't know, but that's what everyone's told me. So, and again, like I said, there was a new generation coming up after the Vietnam War ended, and the Black Panthers were getting, they were getting taken down by the Federal Task Force and all that. So these guys, it's just a new generation, wanted to be different, and I think that's how they formed. And then they start trying to take over more neighborhoods, and it just spread, So other neighborhoods had to form their gangs to combat them from coming into their neighborhoods. So it's like the more territory you got, the more money you could make selling drugs. So
there's always a battle for dominance, right? Whether it's the Bloods, Crips versus Crips. Would you say that there was a crew or a set that were kind of, I don't want to say the top gang, but maybe known to be, up there with the most brutal or the most feared? Was there a crew on the beat that was like, those guys are the real most dangerous ones? Or was it kind of more of a general level of like the Bloods and Crips, they're all serious?
I think that it was more general, but it's like every neighborhood, if one guy was crazier than the other, they all had their crazy guy, their shooters in every neighborhood. So it depends. To me, all the years that I was in there investigating crimes, it was who was out of jail. Because sometimes these guys, this gang would kind of be dormant, you wouldn't hear from them. They would kind of, nothing's going on with this game, and then all of a sudden, oh man, something's going on. They're having shootings and fights over there, and then you realize, oh, this guy got out of jail, and he was a bad dude. He was the shooter. He caused all this havoc in that gang, right? So it was kind of like I say, the revolving door. Like this gang would have their guy, but then they would go to jail or die or something like that, and then they would, the violence would be quelled for a while just because of that. But it was just a revolving door around the whole city, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.